Good morning. It's great to see so many of you on the screen this morning. My name is Donna Becker, and I'm president of the Kaufman Museum Board of Directors, and it's my privilege to welcome you this morning. I want to remind you that this presentation is being live streamed on Facebook, and for people that would want to watch it there, you would need to go to facebook.com/Kaufman Museum. It is also being recorded, and so it will be, after today, it will be posted on the museum website as well for people to come back and watch it or watch it for the first time.
Sunday's Zoom is so much clearer.
Yeah.
Picture and everything.
It is my pleasure to introduce Glen Ediger, designer, inventor, author, and expert on threshing stones. He hosts a blog on Mennonite farmers around the world, and he has a special interest in Mennonite foods, which is his topic here today. So please let me present Glen, his program Mennonite Food Traditions.
Well, I'm glad to be here at Kaufman Museum today, share information about Mennonite food traditions as a part of the annual Kansas celebration, this year with online presentations. Fortunately, it is a rainy day outdoors and all outdoor activities have been canceled, so we're limited to indoor.
Kaufman Museum.
Over the years, I've regularly participated and volunteered at the Kansas celebration, and I always look forward to it. Kaufman Museum has been a part of my life since I was a child. Why am I talking about Mennonite foods? I'm not a food expert, not a cook, not a baker, not a gardener, and no longer a farmer, but I do eat pretty much every day. And I really enjoy the traditional foods and the cultures they come from. I grew up in central Kansas on a farm. My family was a typical Low-German Mennonite family. Church and family were central to life with food production and daily a part of that experience. I will be speaking from that perspective. Like most Kansas farmers, we raised chickens, sheep, hogs, cattle, grew mostly wheat, but also crops to feed the cattle. And my mother had a large garden. My parents, their parents, and siblings, as well as most people at church, all spoke Low German to each other, but I never learned it. A few years ago, I had fun writing 2 books about Mennonite history. I collected a lot of information that I didn't use, but thought it was very interesting and wondered if others might be interested. So I started a Facebook page called Mennonite Farmer, sharing information related to Mennonites and farming around the world, just for fun and learning. I'm also a very visual person, so I always post lots of pictures with over 500 posts and over 6,000 followers in 45 countries. So I guess people are interested. Hopefully you will be too. I did occasional food posts, and they were always favorites. Without a doubt, my food pictures with history evoke an enthusiastic and nostalgic response among Mennonites. Excuse me. The New Year's cookie post reached over 90,000 people. Throughout Mennonite history, farming has been a cultural experience, not only including a family-oriented lifestyle of self-reliance, but also as a business. The Mennonite farm was all about food. The entire family was involved in food production, tending the large gardens, picking fruit from the orchards, growing crops, reaping the grains, feeding the livestock, milking, canning, butchering, rendering, and smoking meats, and of course, cooking and baking. And it is important to note that historically, the cooking and baking jobs usually fell to the women and girls. Food is a fundamental part of the traditional Mennonite experience. People are emotionally attached to the foods enjoyed by the Mennonite farmsteads. And many of those foods are still a part of daily consumptions and are still especially enjoyed at traditional holiday meals. Many or even most of what we call traditional Mennonite foods weren't invented by Mennonites, but were adopted from the local cuisines and adapted to what was available in what would be tasty and nourishing foods for the family. There's no way I can cover all the foods, but I'll focus on some of the popular Low-German foods and their traditions. I won't have time to share recipes for each item, but I hope to entice you with 30 examples to evoke some memories and present some history. Some of you may not know much about Mennonite history, but I can't talk about the foods without sharing the basic. I will trace the Low German ethnic path, which is the history of my family that ended up in Kansas. But there are many Mennonite paths, all a part of the Mennonite mix. The term Mennonite refers to a religious denomination, sometimes is used to refer to their Northern European culture. It is not a race. In the 16th century, Western Europe was a church state with controls on all aspects of the state and of personal life, holding that only the church could interpret the Bible. Reformers, however, insisted that people could individually read and interpret the Bible themselves. These new thoughts had a great influence on a monk by the name of Martin Luther, who nailed the 95 Theses to the door of a Wittenberg church in 1517, influencing people all over Europe. Later, radicals went further, saying that individuals had the right to baptize themselves upon a confession of faith. These groups were called Anabaptists, which means one who baptizes again. This practice caused the Anabaptists to be hunted and condemned for years. A man named Menno Simons became the leader of Northern European Anabaptists. His teaching of nonviolence were founded on the belief in the mission and the ministry of Jesus, founded in the Sermon on the Mount. Anabaptists were being persecuted, but rather than fight, many of these followers survived by fleeing to neighboring states, where ruling families were tolerant of their beliefs, taking with them many of their food traditions. Many were invited to Prussia, where they lived and prospered for hundreds of years in relative peace and success. Many Mennonites became involved in farming with grand accomplishments in farm ground improvement, creative farming practices, and extensive farm diversity. This Prussian experience is a part of my legacy. After 200 plus years in Prussia, they had increased trouble, increased taxes to protect their military exemption, and a need for more land due to the growth of the Mennonite population. Russia's Catherine the Great, seeing these prosperous and peaceful Mennonites with a need for new land and religious freedoms, invited them to the newly conquered Ukrainian region of South Russia to again develop and improve the land and to advance farming practices. Many chose to migrate to the Ukraine, bringing together Mennonites from all different locations, producing a considerable variation in the Mennonite mosaic, and bringing with them the many food traditions from their regional experience. In the early 1800s, the Russian Mennonites were again very successful in food production and innovative farming practices, for a while living in peace and productivity. But here again, over the years, privileges were being curtailed. The loss of exemption from government conscription and considerable population growth within the Mennonite community and a lack of land spawned the desire for another migration. During the days in the Ukraine, the Mennonites engaged in diversified farming. Gradually, they concentrated on raising wheat as a major crop. They promoted the growing, milling, marketing, as well as home use of the hard winter wheat they called Turkey Red. The London wheat market began to appreciate this hard winter wheat. Production was continually increased along with new machinery, and opening of new ports gave access to Europe, and the Ukraine became known as the granary of Europe. They were enticed with significant incentives to come to the American plains to once again create communities, build commerce, and develop the fertile soil. This inspired another mass migration to new farmland and religious opportunity. My ancestors were drawn by the invitation of the Santa Fe Railroad to Kansas. It was a very successful campaign, being one of the largest single group immigrations in U.S. history. More specifically, the group of Mennonites of my ancestral past are referred to as Low German Russian Mennonites. It is absolutely amazing that the Low German culture, language, and foods have been kept alive for over 400 years. Low German, or Plattdeutsch, translates to flat German, referring to the low plains of northern Germany. The Plattdeutsch language was a language spoken by my parents, uncles, and aunts, and most other people in church, but few of my generation learned to speak it. Plattdeutsch is the language used for the traditional Low German foods. The Mennonite families migrated to Kansas to help develop the plains. They continued to promote turkey wheat's development and production. Kansas was called the breadbasket of the world. Hard winter wheat had some qualities that made it the desired flour for bread. In the Mennonite home, bread was always on the table. Turkey red, known for its stronger flavor over the prevailing soft white wheat alternative, was high in protein and had excellent baking qualities. So if you were a farmer, it is completely logical that wheat-based food would be a primary part of the family diet. Without a doubt, Sweebach, more traditionally called Sweebach in Low German, is the iconic roll made by Mennonites for hundreds of years. Sweebach buns are similar to bread rolls, but are richer, traditionally made using lard, now butter, but a bit saltier and not quite so firm as bread dough. It is still debated whether it should be made with eggs or without eggs. Unique in shape, they're formed by placing one bun atop another. One ball of dough, slightly flattened, forms the bottom. A second piece, a little smaller, is pinched off and pressed onto the bottom one so it won't topple off while baking. Apparently, the trick is to use your knuckle to press the top bun down into the bottom bun. Historian Cornelius Cron believes Sweebach may be the only item among our traditional foods dating back to the Reformation or the time of Mennonites. Mennonite immigrants from the Netherlands who settled in Prussia continued to practice and then later brought it with them to the Ukraine. Mennonites came to Kansas with their Low German language, the turkey red wheat, and this tasty, soft dinner roll, which is still commonly baked and eaten in Mennonite homes in Canada and the US, often with jelly or ham and cheese. The long-standing tradition is to bake Sweebach on Saturday and then eaten on Sunday as a part of the breakfast or for a Sunday afternoon faspa. Sweebach was certainly a part of my tradition. Mom made Sweebach every Saturday morning, and if you grew up with that experience, you know the aroma that wafted throughout the house. Sometimes dough was pinched off and given to me for a Saturday morning treat. Of course, large batches were made, so Sweebach would last throughout the week. My mother prided herself in making the perfectly shaped Sweebach with just the right shape and even browning. She would cull out the not so good ones and save them for her and Dad to eat later in the week or to make Russia Sweebach. Her other specialty was making kleines Sweebach for the grandchildren. Today, Sweebach is a special place in many Mennonite memories as a staple food at weddings, funerals, potlucks, MCC sales, at Low German Mennonite restaurants, and for FASPA. FASPA is a light lunch at about 4 p.m. on workdays, or FASPA also means the gathering of family and friends, usually around 4 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, for a light meal and fellowship with an emphasis on fellowship. The meal always included Sweebach, coffee, and might also include cheese, cold cuts, and jelly. In our family, it was typical to have FASPA brought to the field by my mother for Dad, or even for the whole family at harvest. She would often bring a blanket, spread it out in the shade of the truck. Food consisted of Sweebach, bologna, ham, or cold sausage, round Colby cheese wedges, sweet iced tea, and a dessert of schnettje or plouts. Russia Sweebach are actually just small chunks of Sweebach that are often returned to the oven and slowly roasted until they are dry rust. I remember my parents eating Russia Sweebach and dipping them in coffee, but as a kid, I only ate it crumbled into milk and covered in sugar. They were a treat during the week and a way of turning Sweebach that was getting a bit too dry into a treat. The simple roasting process extended the life of Sweebach to give it a wonderful new taste, which traveled well without turning rancid or moldy. Baskets filled with toasted buns have been a blessing on long journeys, partially sustaining the migrants on their travels to new lands. Here's a story from Abraham Ratzlaff of the Huffmansow group migrating to America in 1874. Our ship, we did not like it especially. I often felt ill, and Mother could not eat of the ship's fare. We had brought from home some Russia Sweebach, cured ham, and onions, which she was able to eat. I want to share the traditional key to baking perfection for Sweebach and bread, the oven. Referencing Norma Jo Voth's book, women baked huge batches of Sweebach and 7 loaves of white bread or rye bread at one time. Big pans filled edge to edge to perfection. The large brick oven was built into every Mennonite house in the villages in Russia, and many later in America. This ingenious system served multiple purposes. It heated the entire house and it provided a place for cooking and baking. Built into the center of the house, the big oven was fired with bundles of grass or other fuels, depending on what was available. A woman had to be something of a genius to gauge the oven temperature. She seemed to know by feeling the heat level with her hand. The women knew their ovens. They became skilled, not always by choice, but out of necessity, baking day after day. Many insist no other oven, no matter how modern or convenient, can produce such wonderful tasting Sweebach or tall loaves of crusty white bread. In the summertime, so as not to heat the home, a simpler oven would be found in one corner of the summer kitchen or outdoors. Twisted straw or dried dung was used for some fuel. Of course, another use for wheat flour is to make unleavened wheat-based foods such as Varenica and noodles. One of the unique, loved, and iconic Low-German foods is Varenica. Varenica was a food we seldom had at home when I was a boy. Mom made them, of course, by hand, then boiled them and would cover them with syrup. It was not my favorite food. Not until later in college did I finally have Varenica fried and then covered in ham gravy that I started to really crave their taste. Of course, in my opinion, Varenica is only half of the perfect meal. It is best when served alongside German sausage. Varenica is a favorite national dish of the Ukraine. They became a part of the Russian cuisine that were adopted by Mennonites. Fillings can vary, but most popular filling in Mennonite circles is cottage cheese. Varenica is a small dough pocket made from flour, eggs, and a little salt, which is rolled out, then cut into round shapes, and then add a heaping teaspoon of dried cottage cheese. Fold it in half and seal the edge. Then it is boiled, fried, or deep fried, and then served. In the old days, this comfort food was freshly made at home with thick cream for the dough and from the previous night's milking. The sour cream topping was farm fresh, not sour at all, but slightly tart and thick. I am one slide ahead of myself. So popular are Varenica at the Mid-Kansas MCC sale that 17,000 of these dumplings made by 400 volunteers vanished long before the end of the sale. In Steinbach, Manitoba, women at the Heritage Village serve as many as 6,000 on Dominion Day. Mennonite love for all forms of pasta-like foods originated in the Vistula Delta. Prussians, rich in flour, had a passion for all the variations, steamed dumplings, and various noodle types. Traditionally, Monday was wash day in the Mennonite colonies. In South Russia, it was customary for every home to serve kilcha for the noon meal that day. The thick, starchy water poured off the boiled noodles made a fine starch for the family laundry. They were made with dough rich in eggs, flour, and water or milk, rolled out and then cut into wide noodle shapes. The strips were dried on racks or even just on chair backs. Kilcha are used as main dishes and sometimes are added to soups. They were often just served with brown butter, but they were even more hearty meal when they were served with cream sauce, often with fried ham, onion, and sour cream, which gives you the delectable schmuggus, a white cream sauce to pour over the noodles. Miriam Penner Schmidt shared this about schmuggus. I could go on and on about the wonderful meals Grandma and my aunts made. Suffice it to say, it was a high-calorie diet. Hence, many of our ancestors were quite stout. I think they were proud of their weight. It showed they were prosperous and ate well, since cooks were never wanting for sour cream on the farm. This old dish dates to the Prussian dairy farm days. Several Mennonite churches still make noodles to be sold at the Kansas MCC sale. Shown are homemade noodles drying at Houghton South Mennonite Church in the 80s. Mennonites love soup. Many variations exist for the hearty taste and nourishment of soups. They're not always unique to Mennonite culture, but were adapted for the Mennonite home. Norma Joseph writes of ancestral days in the Ukraine. They were a generation of soup lovers who believed the best soup was made in large quantities and in big pots. Their favorite was chicken noodle soup with homemade noodles. In spring, when the young friars were ready, it was chicken borscht. For them, soup was a Saturday feast or a weekday banquet. Mennonite soups are substantial, thick with vegetables, potatoes or sauerkraut, fortified with noodles or flavored with home-cured sausage or smoked pork. Our frugal forebears' soups were often meals in themselves. In those days, the noon meal was the main meal of the day, and lighter fare such as soup was the evening meal. Our mothers, grandmothers, and great-mothers measured few ingredients when they made soup. They added a little of this and a little of that. If they wanted thick soup, they added flour. If they wanted thin soup, they added milk. They seasoned their soups according to taste. Think of a recipe for soup as a guideline and then follow your own preferences. Noodle soup is made with homemade noodles with vegetables and meats, all grown on the farm. This description is from Pluma Pie Cookbook. Basic chicken noodle soup is made by cutting the chicken into small pieces and cover with water to which onions and some salt has been added. Bring to boil, remove scum as it forms. Allow it to simmer until almost done. Desired spices may be put in the spice container. Cook noodles in boiling salted water until tender. When done, drain well. Remove spice container and add noodles to the soup. The recipe still leaves a lot to the taste of the individual cook. With endless variation, this hearty soup with protein, starches, vegetables, and spices satisfied the hungry family. I think the most revered soup, which is loved by many but avoided by others, is the Low-German cabbage borscht, made with chicken stock or beef stock. My mother made it with chicken, but as a child, it was never my favorite. I don't know if it was the taste or the fact that I couldn't identify all the pieces that were in it, but I love it now. The Ukrainians made beet borscht. The Low-German Mennonites borrowed the soup, but substituted cabbage as the main ingredient and still called it borscht. Kansas Swiss Mennonites are better acquainted with and still make the original beet borscht. To make cabbage borscht, boil the meat in water until almost done. Add vegetables that include chopped onion and possibly potatoes and carrots. Then add tomatoes and dill or other spices, which may include parsley, allspice, bay leaves, star anise, and definitely salt and pepper. Some like to add a dollop of thick cream at the table. The Kansas MCC serves borscht at the Feeding of the Multitude, a must for me each year. Here's a description of the borscht from their website. The soup served at the sale contains mainly cabbage with carrots, potatoes, onions, tomatoes, and chunks of beef added. Green bean and ham soup is another traditional savory Mennonite soup, all made from things on the farm and also one of my personal favorites. I think I liked it as a kid because I could identify all the pieces in the soup with no mystery parts. To make, boil meat, which was always ham at our house, until tender with a little salt. Then slice the potatoes, carrots, and onions, cut beans in 1-inch pieces, cook vegetables until done, using the herbs to your liking. Many consider summer savory an essential ingredient. Add more milk or water as needed. Summa borscht. I don't recall growing up with summer borscht, also called summa borscht, beet green borscht, or krut borscht, but it's a fond memory for many. This soup can be made with almost any leafy green, soil or beet greens, and some remember this soup was made very economically with leafy green weeds found on the farm. The fresh leaves will instantly lose their beautiful bright green color as soon as it hits the hot broth. But don't let the look fool you, it is truly delicious. Put the water and ham in a large pot and bring it to boil. Simmer for a few hours, remove the bone, add the vegetables, and cook until tender. Add the meat back into the pot. Taste it and season with salt and pepper. Some add milk. One Mennonite farmer follower had this comment: "My all-time fave was the beet green borscht. The flavor was just outstanding, but looking at it made you think it was pig slop. But I loved it." Just like the special oven was for baking, the cook stove was unique too. The Adobe House Museum in Hillsboro has an outstanding example of the first-class 1870s Mennonite kitchen. This kitchen featured 3 different fireboxes for multiple cooking and baking needs. The brick cooking stove with cast iron top with 2 holes to insert different cooking utensils. The stove has a medium-sized minegropa, which was used for rendering lard and cooking soup that required a large pot. The Mennonite farmstead had access to meats because they raised it: beef, lamb, and pork, and chicken. On butchering day, neighbors and relatives worked together in organized harmony for social needs as well as being productive. It meant ham, bacon, sausage, dried beef for the smokehouse. It meant scrapple, crackings, liverwurst, pig's feet, and jars of lard in the cellar, which provided fats for homemade soup. The hog was largely separated into various portions, which were converted into the final products by different processes. One process which required a considerable amount of time was rendering the huge quantities of fat. A single 400-pound hog could yield about 100 pounds of fat. After the fat was stripped, It was run through a meat grinder to break it down, and then it was heated over a fire in a large cauldron called the minegrova. The purpose of this procedure was to melt the lard, to steam off as much moisture as possible, and separate the cracklings, the fatty skin and meats from the lard. The batch was then strained to separate the lard from the cracklings. Both were stored in large crockery jars. Before freezers, cracklings would only keep a short time, which may be one reason why they were often considered to be a delicacy. My wife even calls cracklings her favorite food. To serve, heat the cracklings in a skillet or saucepan over medium heat until crisp. Drain off accumulated fat. A hand potato ricer works well for this. Sprinkle the salt and serve hot. Good for breakfast, best served with rye bread and dark syrup. Another way of serving is to fry the cracklings, adding sliced potatoes or sliced apples. After fat has been drained off, add a little water and chopped onion. Cracklings will be soft but not crisp, then serve with rye bread and syrup. Okay, sausage is my all-time favorite Mennonite food, also referred to as farmer's sausage or just German sausage. An old German saying of unknown origin goes, all things have an end, except sausage. It has two ends. My dad was also well known for saying that he was even included in his funeral. Albert always said, the longer the sermon, the shorter the sausage for the minister. Sausage has a special place in Mennonite hearts, but I don't necessarily mean that medically, I hope. It's also been a food tradition for a long time. There's even folklore that talks of a split among the Low-German Mennonites over butchering day practices, where some of the Mennonite group may have imbibed in a bit of vodka, along with the butchering, and some other groups viewed this as a sinful practice. Today, there's still a great tradition in the Mennonite German sausage making, cooking, smoking, and eating. I live in Kansas, where each small town that still has a butcher shop has its own recipe for their German sausage. Many of these butcher shops provide sausage to the MCC sale for meals or for purchase. Every year, our first stop at the MCC sale is to buy sausage before they run out. I've always thought there should be sausage tasting like wine tasting to compare the subtle differences between each meat locker's recipe. My niece actually hosted a sausage tasting supper where each selected our favorite from the unidentified samples. It was fun and tasty, but I won't reveal the winner. Based on hundreds of responses from my Mennonite farmer post, half the people are highly opinionated who has the best sausage. The other half are asking, where can I get some? Sausage making was a major process. All the hog meat intended for the sausage was run through the meat grinder, seasoned, and then put into a press, which forced the sausage through a small hole and through a short pipe on which the casings had been pushed on to receive the sausage as it was squeezed out. The casings for the sausage were intestines, which were thoroughly cleaned. This was not considered a favorite task on butchering day. Historically, the sausage was smoked, which made it highly resistant to spoilage, but when it had been kept so long that spoilage threatened, it could still be canned. Cheese making has been a continuous, prolific, and high-quality industry around the world. Wherever Mennonites have lived, they made cheese. The Prussian Mennonites took up dairying and careful cattle breeding. And through careful cattle breeding, they were able to develop a high-quality milk-producing cow, which was popularly called the milk boat. The settlers brought with them the knowledge and skills essential to management of the pasture lands, which affected the taste. They successfully improved milk production and the utilization of the milk. The Prussian Mennonites also developed a special cheese in their settlements, of which they annually delivered tons to the markets in Königsberg and Tilsit. This Tilsit cheese, a semi-soft, mild-flavored cheese, became a famous product which found a market all over Germany and retains its reputation to present day. Tilsit cheese is still being kept alive by a local dairy farmer, Jason Schmidt. I frequently buy it and really like it. Other traditional Mennonite cheeses were made in France, Switzerland, Canada, US, and Mexico. Just a few samples include Colby, Swiss, Butterkäse, Swiss Jahre, Emmental, Titi de Moines, and Chihuahua cheese. I didn't grow up with bieroks, but I sure like them now. They're not unique to Mennonite culture, but were commonly enjoyed among Mennonite families. Bieroks among Low-German Mennonites were bread pockets amply filled with mixture of ground beef and cabbage. A little like a hamburger sandwich and made a hearty meal, were conveniently served hot or cold and were a fine traveling companion. Today, the Russian Mennonite version of the bierox continue to be a favorite of many homes and restaurants. Here's what I think is the best sweet treat the Mennonites have traditionally made: the New Year's cookie, also called Portskelki Nieuwjaarscoca in Low German, and it's not a cookie at all, but more of a fruit fritter. The origin of the New Year's cookie is unclear, but most likely the German, Dutch, Polish areas. But there is little doubt that many are nostalgic for this traditional Mennonite food. The traditional Dutch name is oliebollen. Traditionally, these raisin fritters were given to their neighbors when they came and sang for them on New Year's Day. The New Year's cookies were a symbol of affluence and luxury and carried with them a wish for an abundant new year. They're made from a spongy yeast batter with added raisins or apple bits and dropped by the spoonfuls into hot, deep fat. The name means tumbling over, since they turn over by themselves when the dough puffs up and then tumbles over and fries to a golden brown. The fritters are then coated. The real question is, do you just leave them plain, coat them with sugar, coat them with powdered sugar, or glaze them? These treats are still a common tradition, popular with so many families making them together on New Year's Day. I have received hundreds of comments and photos from followers. Regional MCC sales are a great place to enjoy them. A huge volunteer force at the Kansas Fairgrounds assures that the New Year's cookies are made fresh for guests throughout the sale, where over 35,000 are made each year. Buppet is a Low German word for a batter-type stuffing for fowl. Often some of the batter is used to fill the cavity of the bird, and the rest of the batter is poured beside the fowl. In the roaster or baked in a separate pan and served hot with the meat. It replaced some of the bread served at the meal. Recipes are found in Off the Mountain Lake Range cookbook, which has 3 variations. In the Pluma Mosta Pie cookbook, there are 6 variations in the recipe. Some include an egg or 2, some don't. Some are made with water, some with milk. Some include sugar. Some people made it as a meal and poured the dough over sausage or pre-cooked meat pieces such as chicken, beef, or pork in the dough. If used as a stuffing, raisins and dates were added. So does anybody really know how to make it? This is not a tradition that I actually grew up with, but is a treat commonly enjoyed by many Mennonites at Easter, Pascha. The tradition of making Easter Pascha was adopted by the Mennonites from their Ukrainian Orthodox neighbors. The Ukrainian version was very egg-rich. The recipe for the dough contains 3 whole eggs and 8 egg yolks, along with 12 cups of flour, the eggs being the celebrated Easter symbol of new life. German Mennonites that immigrated to North America in the 1920s baked a lighter version. Often the baker saved coffee tins to use for baking these tall, light, and airy sweet loaves. Traditionally, Pascha is decorated with simple designs using icing and sprinkles. Decoration was always a fun part of the experience. Another Mennonite food we often had for Pascha in the field, or really any meal, was plouts. I describe plouts as a fruit pizza. Using the available seasonal fruit from the farm, we used cherries, sometimes apricots or mulberries, as those were the fruit trees on our farm. Norma describes it as a rich baking powder pastry with fruit. Plouts, Russian Mennonite style, were huge, baked in big black baking pans, 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, in the outdoor oven, as this was a summer treat. Some people use a yeast dough, frequently as Sweebach dough. I don't have much of a sweet tooth, but I do enjoy this sweet treat a lot. Another seasonal favorite is peppernuts or peppernet in Low German, and pfeffernuss in High German. Nothing is more Christmassy or associated with grandmothers than peppernuts. Peppernuts are tiny, spicy cookies, much smaller than other cookies, about the size of a dime to a quarter. Peppernuts are not exclusively Low German, but are also made in a number of European countries. Our collective great-grandmothers' peppernuts were very plain, flavored mostly with pepper and a few other spices. As the recipes were handed down from generation to generation, the peppernuts became fancier. As time went on, various combinations of ingredients were added, like nuts, dates, raisins, citron, coconut, gumdrops, and others. Different combinations of spices and flavorings were also used: cinnamon, allspice, cardamom, nutmeg, ginger, cloves, vanilla, lemon, and mace, and yes, anise. Peppernuts may vary slightly in size and shape, and color may range from almost white to dark brown. Some are hard, some are soft, others are crisp and crunchy. One constant seems to be they were made in great quantities, as they were often gobbled up at Christmas with friends and family. For all the peppernut variations, there are probably about as many recipes as there are Mennonite cooks. Springula cookies were traditionally rolled out with a wooden roller that was carved with designs, and then the dough was cut into pieces. A hard, dry cookie with strong anise flavor. Shentia was part of my tradition too. My mother would make them as a rolled up snack from pie dough that was covered with cinnamon and sugar. Another version of schnitja is similar to baking powder biscuits, but lighter, richer in butter and cream. This very rich finger biscuit was a part of the old West Prussian custom. These foods go back to a time when men and women worked hard, walked behind plows, gardened, picked fruit, stacked bundles, threshed, washed clothes, hunted, fed cattle and livestock, and much more. They worked hard physically, burned calories, and they needed a carb-based replenishing snack. Crullers or rollkuchen are a tradition in many ethnic groups around the world. The best known origin comes from the 19th century Dutch called krullen, meaning to curl. In our family, some crullers were a summer food, almost always eaten with watermelon. At Faspa with ham, or on a Sunday evening with visiting relatives in the backyard. I don't know how this combination came to be, but the combination certainly is a Mennonite tradition. Fun note, just before singing Over the Rainbow, Dorothy takes one of the just fried crullers from Aunt Em, offers some to farm hands. Then Dorothy takes a small bite and tosses a piece to Toto. Simple and airy, with eggs, flour, baking soda, whipping cream, and a little salt, are rolled out thin. They are cut into rectangular pieces with a slit in the middle of each so they don't become one big balloon in the hot fat. Typically served plain as a hand food with cold watermelon, or some prefer syrup dribbled over them, or sprinkle them with powdered sugar. I grew up with lots of crullers and watermelon. The sandy hill soils between Bueller and Hutchinson, Kansas, part of my home turf, are known for their ability to produce large, juicy, and sweet watermelons. The Mennonite love affair with watermelons began when they arrived in Russia. There in the lush bounty of the Ukraine, these small oblong melons with green stripes on the outside and wonderfully red, crisp, and juicy on the inside grew in abundance. Seeds from this Ukrainian legacy melons were brought to Kansas, and they live on today. Mennonites are known to be frugal, but that also means to not let anything go to waste, particularly when it comes to food. When eating watermelon, do you throw out the rinds, slop them through the hogs, or could something special be made with the scrap? Watermelon rind pickles were common in our house. The Kansas State Historical Society says Mennonites are admired for their hard work and excellent crops. Early Mennonites in Kansas were reported to be especially fond of watermelon. The woman who wishes to make use of all parts of food, even pickle the watermelon rind. Inulita gurtia is a summer treat and was always welcome on our farm. Simple to make and very tasty. Boil water and add pickling salt and vinegar. Then wash and pack the medium-sized cucumbers in a small crock in layers with dill, grape, or cherry leaves, and a few horseradish leaves. Pour the boiled mixture after it's cooled over the cucumbers. Put a plate on top and weigh it down and cover it with a dishcloth. No need to wait a long time for these dills. They're crisp and crunchy in a short time. Cherry mousse or Kirschmousse in Low German is sometimes described as fruit soup or thin sweet pudding with fruit. It is traditionally served for dinner on holidays. This dish was regularly served by Mother and is a must on the table at Easter. Made with tart cherries and lots of sugar, always served alongside ham, fried potatoes, and Sweebach. Families also serve Kirschmousse as a side dish or dessert throughout the year. Most is easily prepared. A thickening made of flour, sugar, cream, or milk is added to the cooked fruit. The amount of flour, sugar, and spice was according to taste and preferences. If the finished product was too thick, dilute with sweet milk, while mousse is still thick. Mousse should have a consistency of medium thick gravy. Mousse is usually served cold, but may also be served hot. Plumamousse is a prune and raisin mousse. It is a very unique food, made with fresh or dried fruit. It is a traditional Low German festive mousse, which has been described as a sweet and creamy fruit soup. served as a dessert or with the meal, either warm or cold. It has been a part of Mennonite cuisine since the Dutch Mennonites lived in the Prussian Delta in the 16th century. It is a dish we had and still have every year. It wouldn't be Christmas without plumamos. I have to admit, it was never my favorite. Always made sure I ate some to please Mom. Plumamos continues as part of the menu throughout the years in Russia, as a dish filled with flavor and calories. It is loaded with spices, cinnamon, star anise, whole cloves, and whole allspice. For the fruit, the warm summers and rich soils of the Ukraine made possible a lush and bountiful harvest from the ever-present farm orchards they planted in the Mleczna villages. To make plumamos, add water to the dried prunes and raisins in a saucepan. Bring to a boil, then add spice and sugar and let simmer. Mix flour and sugar, add enough milk to make a paste. Add a small amount of milk to the paste, whisking well to beat all the lumps out. Add thickening mixture slowly so it does not curl, stirring constantly until mixture comes to a boil. If mousse is too thick, when it is cooled, add a small amount of milk, cream, or water. Communities made it in different ways, even locally between Bueller without milk and Gossel with milk. Plumamos is a love it or hate it dish. It's okay, but I actually prefer cherry mousse. Pies are another use for fruits. Mennonites are considered skilled pie bakers, making pies with endless homegrown fruit sources. However, for the sake of this presentation, all I will say is here again, there are probably as many pie recipes as there are Mennonite bakers. So, if you became hungry or nostalgic, or if I just gave you a taste of the rich history of our Low-German Mennonite foods and how they ended up in Kansas, then I guess I succeeded. These dishes and treats have evolved from Mennonites living at different places at different times. They traveled with them from country to country and still continue to be a regular part of the Mennonite diet from Saskatchewan to Paraguay. Every family will have their own recipes. The only correct recipe is just the way Grandma made it. No way could I ever cover all there is to talk about, but I hope I encourage you and your family to continue or even to restart making some of these ethnic foods. I do apologize for mispronouncing and stumbling over so many words. I know I will never make it as a broadcaster. So keep traditions alive and enjoy. Thank you. So I believe we have a little bit of time for probably 15 minutes before the Zoom ends. So Austin, are you there?
Yes, I am. And I have been keeping an eye on the Zoom and Facebook comments. And so if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the chat or the Facebook comments. So far, especially on Facebook, we've had a lot of great people responding with where they're from and some of their memories. Glenn, I saw a few of your neighbors from North Newton giving a quick shout out to you. A question in the Zoom chat from Barb Unger. I'd be curious to hear about any fermentation practices. Salt also seems to have been a major preservative agent.
Is that preservation or fermentation, he said?
Fermentation.
Fermentation. I have my wife, Karen, here. She is skilled at cooking foods. Like I said, I'm not. Do you have a comment, Karen?
I don't really have a comment. I know that my mom would set fresh cream out on the table for a couple of days to make clabber milk that she used with cucumbers to make a salad. But we never made sauerkraut. I think there are traditions that make sauerkraut and other fermented foods like that. So in my tradition, we didn't have a lot of other fermented foods.
Next question.
From Carol Peters, what about Russian pancakes that are sold at the MCC sale?
That was covered and I can't cover it all.
That was something I grew up with.
Actually, yeah, I didn't grow up with them and Karen did. So
my dad made them when my mom had a church meeting. He would make them for us kids. And then I tried to get my mom to make them and she didn't know what I was talking about. And she never did learn to make them.
as we wait for a few more questions to come in, this is just a reminder. I know some people were running into limits on our Zoom presentation today. If you know of anyone who wasn't able to get in, this presentation will be published on kaufmanmuseum.org within the next few days. And also there will be a recording of it on our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/Kaufman Museum. So feel free to spread that information or rewatch it yourself if you want to.
I finally went to the full screen and I see a lot of people I know and a lot of people names from the Facebook page that I do. So thanks for joining.
Thank you, Glenn. It was very interesting.
Any other questions?
Yeah, from Facebook. How about clabber milk? Boiled eggs cut up with fresh lettuce from the garden.
Clabber milk, in my experience, was just cream allowed to sit on the table in warm weather. It was covered with a towel or something, and allowed to get curds. And there may be other kinds of clabber milk and other traditions, but Mom only used it with cucumbers that I'm aware of.
I think we had it occasionally. Not my favorite thing either. I didn't like all these foods when I was a kid. I like them now.
On Facebook from Alan Thiessen, I didn't hear anything about Swiss bona pierogi.
That's because neither one of us is Swiss.
I couldn't cover the Swiss. I did make a shout out on the beet borscht, but I decided I can't cover everything. So yeah, it's a food I'm familiar with, served at the MCC sale and locally at the Bread Basket restaurant. And some of my friends make it.
Also from Facebook, from Brian Regier, is there a story about how Varenica was created?
I'm not aware of one. It was a tradition of the northern states or northern countries. It's a pasta. It's that there are variations of it all around the world. Certainly Italy, and also pot stickers in China and things like that. So it's a very international thing. The way the Mennonites make it, that evolved to be what it is.
From Steve Friesen on Zoom, did Turkey Creek also act as a culinary divide? Glenn, I believe you grew up right near that line.
I did grow up right next to the Turkey Creek Grade School and real proud of that. So the question was about it or just the
Cultural.
the cultural?
Culinary divide.
Culinary, yeah, I don't know that some, it's pretty English, as we would have said back then. The foods at school weren't much of a Low German thing, even though about half the students, out of the 35 students, about half of them were Mennonite.
The Turkey Creek, for those who are not familiar with Kansas geography, ran between the Swiss Mennonites of Mound Ridge and the Low-German Mennonites of Inman and Bueller. So they each had their own culinary tradition. So
Yeah.
in that way, it's a culinary divide. Glenn, of course, grew up on the wrong side of Turkey Creek. He was Low German, but he was on the Swiss side.
I was a quarter mile on the east side of the Turkey Creek and liked it. Sorry, I misunderstood your question, Steve.
From Kristen Kaufman, what comments, knowledge do you have about poppy seeds or poppy seed rolls, also sold at the MCC sale?
One of the other Swiss Mennonite traditions, which is my favorite Swiss Mennonite food. I can't speak to it, but I really enjoy it. We have several of our friends make them really well. And we enjoy them every year at the MCC sale. We buy one. They're not cheap, usually about $40 for one roll, but Karen and I can spot the good ones before we cut into them.
Also a great question on Zoom from Carol Peters. Glenn, why don't you start a restaurant?
Remember my second statement? I don't know anything about it. I like to eat it though. And it was a bit awkward doing this presentation because I'm not that knowledgeable on food. I just happened to do all these posts that really generated a lot of interest. And so I was pleased that Kaufman, with their theme today about Kansas and foods, asked me to try and put this together. And so I did what I did.
Thank you.
On Facebook, a question from Jeff Linscheid. Have you ever had peppermint pepper nuts? That is the only kind my grandma made.
I think I have, but my friends that know me know I can walk past cookies all day long. I don't have that sweet tooth. Karen?
I have never tasted peppermint pepper nuts.
I don't doubt that that person likes them.
Well, we have a few more minutes. If there are any more questions, I hope I've read through all of them and not missed any. But if you have any last minute things you want to add into the chat, feel free to do so.
Please see the slide with those book titles again.
I didn't hear that.
Can we see the slide with those book titles again?
The book titles.
Book titles, oh, okay. I don't know. I don't know if I can.
Right here.
Yeah, there it is, from the beginning. Are you seeing, did it say Kaufman Museum on your screen now?
No, I'm sharing your screen right now.
I don't think I can do that. I'm not technically that savvy to go back now that I've gotten out of it. That's all right. I'll go ahead. Yeah, Austin's here. It's the last slide. Oh, yes. It's a long way. Yeah. There, yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Kaufman Museum has some of the threshing stone books here. The Upton South book is, I have a few, but mostly the church handled that. Do you want me to go back a slide? Is that what you really meant? No, he meant this. Okay.
Oh, that's exactly what I wanted to see.
Okay. Because
These
I do want to note, I'm not going to read them off, but see these sources, which have been really helpful for either visuals or references. Norma Joth both, if you're at all interested in this subject, her two books are the perfect book to read through.
They're out of print, so you have to try to find them at a used bookstore or something like that.
Unless there's one more question, I think we'll terminate.
Yeah, maybe this is a good question to end on, from Alan Thiessen on Facebook. Do you have any favorites among the restaurants that serve ethnic Mennonite food?
Well, yeah, I do, because it's local. It's only a mile away. The Bread Basket in Newton, Kansas has a German buffet where actually some of the foods I showed were photographed from their menu or their food on my plate. So I recommend that. There are other local ones. If I start saying them, I'll miss some. On my Mennonite Farmer page, people around the country have said, oh, there's this restaurant somewhere in California that I don't know that serves this and serves that. So yeah, all across the country, there are restaurants that serve this. I just do a Google search. With that, I think I'll say goodbye, and I had fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, for presenting today, and thank you for everyone who joined us. And again, just a reminder, this presentation will be up on kaufmanmuseum.org and our Facebook page. So yeah, thank you for joining and have a good rest of your day.